Hello, and welcome to this bonus episode of America a History, recorded straight after our recently published episode, What is a Filibuster? I'm joined now by the guest from that episode, Gregory Koger, to discuss this a little bit more. Gregory, thank you for hanging on.
It's my pleasure, and I love being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. No, it was really great to have you on. We've talked a lot about politics on this podcast, and we don't often get into the sort of nitty gritty as to like how it all actually works. And certainly to myself, being in the UK, just not being in the US, the idea of a filibuster is just so alien to me. And particularly this concept that someone could just stand on the floor and just talk and talk and talk and talk until everyone's sick of them, basically, and until they can't stand up anymore. Is there a point that a filibuster can just go too far?
We actually talk about your intro first. The filibustering should not be completely alien to you, because one of the early examples of filibustering was by a member of parliament named, I think, Parnell from Ireland. In the 19th century, he filibustered in the House of Commons on behalf of Irish interests and forced a review of UK policy towards Ireland at the time. And it wasn't through speeches as much as by making repeated parliamentary motions, if I recall. So again, there's lots of different ways to filibuster, and one way is by forcing votes on lots and lots of different procedural questions. Now, can it go too far? So certainly yes. I mean, there are a lot of situations, at least in U.S. politics, where legislation actually has to pass. One great example is, as you probably have heard, the debt that the U.S. government can take on is limited by law. And periodically, that limit has to be increased because we keep on overspending. And if we don't raise the debt limit to accommodate the fact that we keep overspending, well, then we'd actually be in default, and that'd be calamitous. And those debt limit increases are subject to filibusters. So if, and they have been filibustered in the past. So, but if someone or some group of senators were filibustering and not relenting and just not giving up and not negotiating, they might actually push the country to the brink of debt default, to the point where the majority party then says, I want to respect your rights and I don't want to override you, but given a choice between the fiscal and financial future of our country and your parliamentary rights, we have to choose the economic interests of our country
Mm.
over your parliamentary prerogatives.
It's interesting because the all the drama that happens around the debt ceiling in your country actually makes front page news over here, which
Oh
is
yeah.
maybe a testament to how significant it is. But you mentioned in the main episode that that there are like key budgetary things that are kind of exempt from filibustering. Why why are things like that not exempt?
The debt limit? One is because reason has traditionally prevailed in the past. Uh, Even when there are crises or these prolonged negotiations, they usually come up with something before we actually go into default. And senators, I think there's a piece of them that likes, well, they maybe like the drama, but especially they like a situation which everybody actually has to sit down and negotiate, because in a lot of policy areas, the problem is that there is no deadline, no pressure. So I sit down and if we were negotiating and I sit down, well, here's my position, and you say, well, here's my position. Why would I concede to you? Why would you concede to me? Why would we bargain in good faith? Because I might just wait for a day when you're not around, and then I can get exactly what I want. So I think legislators, on some level, think there's benefit to having these crises that forces them to negotiate and to bargain in more or less good faith, because otherwise they'll just sit around and wait for the other side to lose.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I went into this recording, I was sort of firmly of the belief that filibusters are just this really obstructive tool that politicians use to be sort of stubborn and make sure that something doesn't get passed. But it does feel from everything we've discussed that there is something a lot more political and certainly a bit more nuanced about filibustering than just that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you know, the thing I left out of the main episode, and I regret it now, is that filibustering can also be a way to force issues onto the agenda. And so what senators are able to do is to, take a piece of legislation that the other party wants and say, that's nice for you, but I'm going to hold it hostage until you pay attention to this other thing that I really care about.
Mm.
From an example in my mind is in the 1990s, uh, when, especially when Democrats thought Republicans were doing something that was a little too responsive to their campaign finance donors, the Democrats would respond by saying, okay, we're going to block this until you allow a vote on campaign finance reform. And so there's a series of these filibusters which culminate in another vote on campaigns finance reform, which then fails, but it kept the issue alive on the public agenda.
Mm.
And in doing so, it helped build momentum towards actually passing campaign finance reform in 2002. And that was, the Bipartisan Campaign Finance Reform Act. But we wouldn't have gotten there if there hadn't been these series of like hostage taking episodes in which the minority party sort of forced an issue onto the Senate floor that
Mm.
otherwise the majority party would prefer to ignore. And going back in history, there are other incidences of this what I call hostage taking strategy that forces things onto the floor.
It's eye-opening really because yeah, it's just shows how it can be used as a force for good rather than just just as a way to stubbornly block something from the other side. Yeah, that's an insightful conversation and I think good extension from the main episode as well. And if anyone hasn't listened to that yet, do go and check that out on the feed. It's just a couple below this. Gregory, thank you for your insight on all things filibusters. It was really great to have you on the podcast. Do remind people where they can get in touch with you directly.
Certainly. I'm on Blue Sky. Search for Gregory Koger. There aren't that many of us. I'll be the one from the University of Miami.
Awesome. Thank you. And to those of you listening, if you like what you hear, we'll put links in the show notes to everything we've mentioned. And you can also support the show from as little as $1, and all the information will be in the show notes. Thank you all so much for listening, and goodbye.